Assistant Secretary of Just Communities, and like Anika, I hold a position that is newly formed, and in our case, has never existed before. I think in this moment, we might be a very special state in that the Just Communities legislation is the first of its kind in the nation, unless somebody should keep me honest and let me know if there is a comparator or a peer to learn from. Our work is very interesting. It's not specific to environmental justice or Justice 40, but it is essential to justice, and it thinks about environmental, social, economic, racial, climate justice, and how we do center the people most impacted, how we ensure that we do people-centered placemaking, and really think about economic mobility as one of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. I'm thinking about equity as a process, but also a mandate by virtue of the Just Communities legislation. So last year, I think our Secretary Jake Day came and spoke about his vision for the Department of Housing and Community Development, thinking about shelter for all, Maryland being fully connected, and thinking about, in particular, how do we right the wrongs of the past? And that is the goal of the Just Communities legislation. It's a very hefty and lofty 2.5-page, very concise piece of legislation that my very small team is meant to interpret and implement, thinking about how do we create a geospatial mapping tool to really identify census tracts in the state of Maryland who are adversely impacted, overburdened, underserved, and thinking about how do we work across the state to combine resources. The function of this legislation is to make a recommendation function from our secretary to the governor, who will then designate just communities that will be in existence for 5 years. That designation process also prioritizes communities in state funding. What does all of this mean? TBD. Definitely asking people to participate in the process as we're building. We're currently developing a map, and we have done an extensive analysis of all the mapping efforts that exist already in the state, as well as the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, looking at HUD maps, looking at EPA maps, Department of Planning, MDE, being able to think about how might we synthesize this, see what is common, and also what this legislation brings in particular. So in addition to looking at factors of racial segregation, be it redlining, different forms of restrictive covenants, we're also looking at economic and housing trends, as well as incarceration rates, rates of asthma. So there are a lot of indicators that are specific to individuals and households, as well as to the places they live in, as well as to some of these historical factors that are continuing to drive inequalities today. So it's a very exciting piece of legislation. We've just recently launched our website, so you can see on the DHCD website an FAQ we've made alongside the legislation that exists there. We've also made a portal for people to be able to ask us anything they want about just communities. We are doing a data-driven, research-based approach, very much thinking about how do we use the tools of today to rectify the past and think about how do we create prosperous communities going forward. I'll talk a little bit more later about some of the existing programs we already have, but our work is very much focused on thinking about how do we do strategic planning interdivisionally, also across sister agencies, and very much getting into community once we get our house in order, as I like to say, to ensure that we're not being extractive and asking too many questions of communities that have already given us knowledge, but being able to bring at least resources and some preliminary solutions, but definitely the infrastructure to be able to understand the meaning of what is being told to us so that it can drive us to action.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mariah Davis. I'm the Environmental Justice Officer for the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. So similar to my colleagues Anika and Kat, this is a new role at DNR, so I'm very happy and privileged to be in a position like this. To give you some background on myself, I'm an advocate at heart. I'm a community organizer. I come from a policy background, so I'm excited to bring those skills to government, which can be a little stagnant at times. But also to talk about DNR, I think we have a lot of really great opportunity to uplift a lot of the work that my colleagues have already been doing. DNR, Maryland Department of Natural Resources, we manage natural resources in Maryland. So that's our public lands. We work a lot with landowners, private landowners, farmers, people who are working to put trees on their lands. We also work in the public space, so we manage all the state parks, all the state forests, and a lot of our waterways and natural resources. So what I think is really important, when approaching this work to Justice40 and any justice work that we're doing, is that we're really taking a look at history and understanding how environmental racism has shown up and continues to show up, especially in our land use and our decision making. So I'm working a lot with with our staff to really define that work and really empower them and to provide some better direction on where we can be taking this work. So because we haven't had anybody at the organization, I'm really there to help organize everybody, and the way in which I see us doing that work from DNR's perspective is through access for everybody. So helping to increase equitable access, not just to our waterways, but also to our park systems, and I'll talk about that more when I talk about some of our Justice40 work. Equitable grant making sure that communities are receiving the best benefits through the dollars and the resources that we have. We've been able to really grow over the years at DNR to be one of the largest environmental grant makers in the state. Preserving history and culture. I think a lot about redlining and white flight and how neighborhoods and communities have continued to shift and change. So I think it's really important as one of the largest landowners in the state that we're thinking about land acquisition, who used to be there and who is there now. So preserving history and culture is really important. Equitable and inclusive programming, making sure everybody feels like they're a part of the work, and empowering communities through data and science. DNR does a lot of work collecting data on oysters and blue crabs and bear populations, and all of that is really great and important, but we don't have enough data on people. How are people being impacted by our program? So those are things that I'm excited to continue to bring to DNR, especially through our Justice40 work and our work broadly. But I think when it comes to Justice40 and any work that we're doing, quite frankly, I think some things that are really important to center are partnerships. So partnerships with my fellow colleagues, but also partnerships with you all, making sure that we're working with everybody, making sure that everybody's voices are heard. The reason we're able to do a lot of this work, and the reason that we have a lot of these programs at DNR, is because other people have advocated for it. So it's really important to really center those voices who have helped us carry out that work. And then meeting people where they are. I can't say enough about how important and imperative relationships are. I'm new to this role, but I'm not new to this space. So I'm very excited. And thank you, Rebecca, for organizing us and being able to talk to you about all the work we're doing at Justice40.
So a recurring theme here. I'm Darren Lova. I'm the Chief of Environment and Sustainable Transportation in the Maryland Department of Transportation. First of its kind position, and I spent more than 20 years at the Natural Resources Defense Council before shocking everyone, including the legend and taking this position, working with Secretary Weaver at the Maryland Department of Transportation and Governor Moore and Lieutenant Governor Miller. So I'm very excited to be here, and the big reason I came here is that, especially under the bipartisan infrastructure law, state DOTs are where it's at in terms of investment in states. We just rolled out our draft consolidated transportation program. You may have read some of this in the press. We're facing some pretty substantial headwinds. We had to cut $1.3 billion compared to last year's version. This is a 6-year program. The year before, we had to cut $3.3 billion. The governor restored some of that with a one-time infusion of money, which was helpful for reducing some of the cuts. However, the 6-year program is still an $18.9 billion investment program. We're an enormous agency. We have more than 100 buildings across the state, and that is just one type of infrastructure we influence. We make a lot of investments across the state. And that's because, as with other state DOTs, MDOT is an umbrella. We include the State Highway Administration, our largest what are called neighborhood administrations, the Transit Administration, the Aviation Administration, the Port Administration, the Motor Vehicle Administration, the Maryland Transportation Authority, which the ordinance. So, and what's really exciting is that right now in our long-range transportation plan, within the playbook, the Maryland Transportation Plan, we have three big priorities. Following Eric, the three is here. Safety is number one, and here's where we have a problem in Maryland, just like we have a problem in a lot of other states. Fatalities, so deaths and injuries keep rising, especially on the roads across the state of Maryland, and it hits certain communities and certain people disproportionately hard. It's unjust, it's inequitable, and we're committed to stopping it. And in fact, we've identified the state's 23 most dangerous roads in our pedestrian safety action plan that we are going to be retrofitting 5 at a time. We've got $100 million set aside for this purpose already. And in fact, there was an open house in Silver Spring just this week to talk about 650 and retrofitting that. New Hampshire Avenue and Silver Spring. Everyone's on that list. So that is what we're doing on safety. A lot of focus on bicycle pedestrian safety. On equity, we're focused on reversing the harms done by our agency and others, such as the infamous road to nowhere in Baltimore. We landed a Reconnecting Communities grant under the bipartisan infrastructure law to develop a process for healing what that tragic and long-headed investment in West Baltimore. On the other hand, Governor Moore revived the red line. We're going to go ahead and build that, and that's going to be a rail line. We're investing a huge amount of funding in transit in our consolidated transportation program to try to do cuts. And then the last thing is climate. The Climate Solutions Now Act, as well as the new climate executive order signed by the governor, has equity components, but it also has very specific. Electrifying our vehicle fleet. That's not something we're directly responsible for, but we have to build out the charging network to make sure that people can actually plug in their vehicles, whether it's cars and trucks or it's heavy trucks. And I've actually been really focused on bringing in federal money to build heavy truck chargers. And I'm proud to say we landed a $81 million EPA grant to build at least 8 chargers on I-95 for heavy trucks by 2030. So that's a huge net gain for Maryland. That's from the Inflation Reduction Act. So this is federal money that we're helping to make rain in Maryland, and we just submitted a grant for almost $20 million to build chargers on I-81 and across I-78. Both of those are multi-state partnerships, I'm proud to say, which I think is not something that MDOT has historically gotten engaged in a lot. So there's a lot going on, and I'm proud to be part of it, and I'm glad to be here with you all. And I hope a lot of you are advocates. I certainly miss being an advocate. Not that I don't love my job, but and it's good to be here with you all. Thanks.
All right, thanks for a great kickoff to this panel. Clearly lots to talk about, so I have one more question before we'll jump into questions, and we'll just do the same order we did. So the next question is to take, and I just want to also point out a couple things, right? How many new positions were created to specifically focus on this? I think that demonstrates a commitment from the administration, although it's part of my job to make sure there's some accountability for these promises. So this is great for me, writing a lot of and the other thing, that we're gonna. The next question is about tools and programs that each of your agencies has
created to really take that Justice40 approach and make sure that 40% of resources are being allocated. The state went through a process of defining in law overburdened and underserved communities, and it's important that when new programs are created, like the Just Communities program, that these programs are talking to each other, and that we're not. I think it was mentioned. Not asking communities over and over and over for the same things, for more information, asking things of people who have already been identified as overburdened. So I'm going to ask you to please pick 1 or 2 programs and tools. I know that you could each probably fill a session with what your agency is thinking about. So just highlight 1 or 2 programs or tools that your agency is developing or has developed to take that Justice40 approach? How can you really operationalize Justice 40 for the state of Maryland? And then we're going to go to you all, so start thinking.
I thought I was being clever because we had so many, and I had my talking points go down to 3. And then Rebecca gets up there and says 1 or 2. She's trying to throw me off of my game here. No. As Rebecca mentioned, there's a lot of exciting things going on in all of our agencies. Some of the key tools, well, one of the key tools that we have at Maryland Department of Environment is our EJ screening tool. It is a tool in which we use the criteria identified in the law that defines overburdened and underserved. It's a mapping tool in which you can engage in, and secret, I know everybody can still hear me and we're online, but it's currently being updated. I'm working on doing some user interface updates to make it a lot easier for folks to navigate. But that is one tool that we use in deciding some of our grants and which communities get that. A lot of the indicators point to communities that are at the 75th percentile or higher across the state. If they get that final EJ score, then they're given priority for funding in that regard. The other things that we utilize to define an EJ area and prioritize funding is 2 of the 4, if you meet 2 of the 4 criteria, and I'm gonna cheat and look at my notes because I should know this by heart, but one of them is if you're in the 112th percent of poverty statewide. The other one is 80% of, I don't know what, I was trying to be creative over there with my change in directive and then completely messed up my notes here. Give me 1 second. All right, gonna have to wing it from memory. Okay, so then the other one, we look at poverty, jobs, the number of jobs, the unemployment rate. And then the third one, gosh, why is this one eluding me? I'll get back to it once everyone finishes talking and I add more. But we have defined criteria which allows us to identify these areas as environmental justice are prioritized for funding. And one of the things that I've been doing since I've got here including updating the screening tool is also looking at that criteria that we have, right? Because they shouldn't be stagnant. Things are changing, we should make sure that we're also changing that information. But if it's also not working and meeting our intended goal, because we're not seeing the applicants that we should be, then the question is, should this scoring criteria change? So since I've been here, I've been having conversations. I mentioned earlier that I have meet and greets with community grassroots organizations, and I've had conversations around like the scoring criteria. Well, like, how do you think this impacts you? What does this mean? Do you see yourself in any of this information? Please give us feedback. I've sent some stuff to some HBCUs and some professors, and we're having real conversations about what that criteria is and how it can be informed. Because a lot of that, to be frank, was done in a tunnel, right? With a group of people in the room that were higher level and said, okay, this is what the criteria is. And from that perspective, sometimes we can miss stuff, right? We have on beer goggles. We know what we know, but we're not bringing in folks to understand things that are impacting them. So that's some of the things that I'm changing and trying to understand how we utilize these tools, what our criteria is, and why we're utilizing it. And then again, getting back to then making it so that people understand how they can access and utilize this funding. One of the things that I think Darren or maybe Kat mentioned is recently I led an effort between multiple agencies, including DHCD, DOT, MES, a couple of others, for submission of an application to join the Just and Clean Communities State Accelerator Program. And Maryland, we were selected, along with a few other, 4 other states, to become part of this accelerator cohort, to look at all this money that we're getting from, the bipartisan infrastructure law, from IRA, from, the Just 40 programs that are in all of our agencies, and see how we can braid those together to make sure that we're giving the most impact to the communities that we intend to reach. So we're excited about what that has, and the federal government is going to give us access to the federal agencies and folks, so we can say, like, we think this requirement is dumb. Can we change this so it can make it easier so we can do this thing, right? But they're also giving us access to technical assistance experts that can help us engage the community more, right? Right now, I'm still developing my office, so any hands that can help me with the outreach that we're doing is great, and they're offering those services through some nonprofits that are locally helping us so that we can do more of this engagement and understanding how we can get these monies to these communities. So, and then also, if you run downstairs, my Noble Smith is down there. He's my EJ coordinator, but he has a list of all of these grant programs that we have here at MDE, which you can take a look at, scan, ask questions, and it also has our email if you want to send me some questions or ask questions. But most of these grants all have EJ carve-outs for the community, and that's the key thing that I want folks to know, is that a lot of these grants, they, you read it and you say, oh, it's for water quality. A lot of them have specific EJ carve-outs for folks to get money to the tune of $4 million or $20 million, and it's, in my opinion, should be overspent, and it's underspent most often. So we still have some work to do. Thanks.
So I guess I can't go through all 20 programs.
That's correct.
Oh. Yeah, I talked a little bit about some of the more overall tools that the Maryland Energy Administration we have, but I'll pull 2 programs out of our stack, because I think they're fantastic examples of how we work and we incorporate Justice40, and we incorporate helping overburdened, underserved communities into our work. One is our community solar program. So we provide funding to those who develop community solar. And for those who've worked with community solar, it's an exciting way to help communities, people who may not want to or be able to put solar on their home or their business. And it may have, maybe they've got nice big oak trees over their home, and there's maybe a whole bunch of reasons. Maybe they're a renter, or maybe they're in a condominium and don't have access to their roof. But it allows us to be able to provide funding to allow those community solar projects to reduce the cost to the people who subscribe to them, who say, I want to buy energy from that clean energy solar project, to reduce their costs of electricity 20 to 25%. That's huge in terms of someone's budget. And one of the most exciting examples, and it was actually the host site of where Governor Moore announced his climate executive order, is a school in Baltimore, Henderson Hopkins. And Henderson Hopkins project is really, really cool, because it took this school and brought the community together to get solar on that school. And not only solar just for that school, but solar for the community. And went even further. People in the community invested in the project and are getting a return on that investment. And then people in the community can subscribe to the energy generated by that project. And we're at this incredible event. And just the excitement of the students about having that hosted on their school was incredible. I mean, just row after row of students just cheering and talking about climate and solar and how it all comes together. The other example uses actually a combination of 2 programs. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and sneak 3 in here, but is we work with our energy efficiency equity program and our solar energy equity program come together. And under that program, we provide grants to community and place-based organizations and local governments to help people think about weatherizing their home to make it more efficient, but also in almost every case, make it a healthier home, better conditioned home that's more comfortable, can address some of the condition issues. And then we added to that to allow, so when they're getting the most efficient home, they also can get an opportunity working with those community-based organizations to get solar on it as well, to bring it all together. And these are just 2 examples out of a $200 million portfolio of programs we have, of which the vast, vast, vast majority of that funding goes to overburdened and underserved communities. And so it's when you just get the most exciting things about our work is to get to see how it comes together and the real world benefits on the ground of people realizing and people's lives getting better.
Point of moderator privilege, the community solar program is also a really good example because in the law itself, so the community solar program was at first a pilot program in the state of Maryland. When there was legislation required to pass it to make it a permanent program in Maryland, because it was working, let's make this permanent. The law actually says that 40% of the energy from the community solar projects has to go to low to moderate income households. So as advocates, whether you're sitting in here as a government or nonprofit or community member, there is a role for Justice40 in advocacy in the legislature, as well as implementation of funds in state agencies. So just to say because that took advocacy on behalf of nonprofits and communities to say, this is how Justice40 could look in Maryland's permanent community solar program, actually putting in law that 40% of the energy produced by community solar projects, so project by project, should go to low to moderate income households. Because we know that every time you subscribe to community solar, you're guaranteed to pay less than what you're paying now for your energy, because of the way that we do community solar. And so you're going to save money. And so if you're going to save money, low to moderate income households should have access to that part of the project. So everybody can subscribe to community solar. There's just dedicated energy that goes to low to moderate income households.
And just to close the loop on that, apologies, is that going forward, because of that change in law, now our funding goes to those projects go to 100%. So we're ratcheting it up. Yep.
Tough act to follow when it gets moderator privilege as well. So Maryland Department of Housing Community Development does, I think, over 60 programs, and it's a very complex agency. If you all are familiar, we are a housing finance agency, we are a public housing authority, we also are part of the balance of state continuum of care agencies, community action agencies across the state of Maryland. So I say that to say, I will be speaking about our energy program, which is in our housing finance agency. One of the opportunities before Just Communities is thinking about how do we look at emergent best practices, those precedent, the pilots that exist already, figuring out what are some of the criteria, is it transferable across the agency, how do we measure and evaluate very different programs with very different sources of funding, very different compliance requirements. If some comes from the federal government, some is generated from our municipal bonds process. How do we think about telling a coherent story each year, every year, about the resources that we invest in communities? So with that caveat, we do have the Empower program, our energy assistance and weatherization program, probably very similar. I know we're in partnership in many ways, but it is a very good example of how Justice40 is already in existence inside of DHCD and gives us a lot of information, insights that we can draw upon as we're doing more evaluation across our neighborhood revitalization programs, across our homeless solutions programs, which is a newest division separate from Just Communities that's really focused on people who are the most impacted, the furthest from justice, how to ensure that we're moving people in a way that they can take advantage of some of the other opportunities. As we've heard today, capacity, I'll do this, I always do air quotes around readiness and capacity. There is a holdover from the past, right? Structural inequality in the past causes capacity challenges today. And so how do we think really about resourcing people who are the most marginalized as we are thinking about accessing some of these wonderful resources at the state level or at the municipal or local level? So our program inherently supports the Justice40 Initiative by ensuring that much more than 40% of our funding goes to the relevant communities. The threshold for that is the 90%, so I think Anika was mentioning 75% and above. We do know that those resources are very meaningful, and not only are they helping people to have safe and healthy homes, but they're also reducing cost burden, which is a goal of the secretaries. You know, how do we think about infrastructure investments as a way to also change the economic circumstance of our community members? And we know so many of these historic challenges also preclude people from being able to access the opportunities that exist. And so some of our work is also looking at how might we partner with legal clinics, how do we support some of the ways that our community members can get out of challenges around tangled title. You know, there are some of these very interesting barriers that we learn as we do talk to community members that might not have risen yet to the level of being considered around program design and implementation. So 98% of the 7,000 projects we complete each year are for low to moderate income disadvantaged communities. The one thing I will flag and caveat as we discuss this, you know, and one of the considerations around Justice40 and EPA is the lack of ability to be explicit about racial inequality, and that is one of the very specific foci of just communities. We are meant to change economic and health equity outcomes and create racial equity by virtue of the legislation, and there is a civil rights component as well as, you know, being able to serve people who are the most marginalized. So I say that to say our secretary is also very transparent. Some of the factors and challenges that we see, we know they are explicitly because of historical racism and ways that resources have been allocated, and the ways that our systems tend to update in ways that make it very difficult to use a racial basis to rectify racialized practices of the past. So when we think about our ability to review these emergent practices and think about disaggregating data by race to see if there are ways, I watched the cumulative impact analysis yesterday, that we can see that there's skewing in low to moderate income status. If we look at racialized patterns across census tracts, it will also help us to achieve this multivariate tripartite mandate of racial, economic, and health equity outcomes, which perhaps is not for everyone, but it will definitely be for this legislation. And it's an interesting pilot to really do an asset-based approach, looking at all the strengths of the state. What can we glean and take from what's already in practice, like our energy program, and think about whether there are ways to either replicate it across agencies inside our own divisions or across state agencies, or if there is a need to create an innovative new way to actually target disadvantaged, vulnerable, minoritized communities going forward. So I will stop there and pass it over to Mariah.
It is hard to be concise because I have a long list, but I'm only going to talk about a few things. So from DNRs, I'm going to talk about state stuff first, and then I'll talk a little bit more about some of our Justice40 programs. But one of the really great things that came out of the advocacy community was something that Rebecca mentioned at the beginning of the panel, and it was defining overburdened and underserved, and putting that into legislation, because now we can use that as a tool, especially when it comes to identifying environmental justice communities and putting resources where they need those programs. So one of the things that we have actually worked with Dr. Wilson and the SEACH team on is developing a park equity mapping tool. So this is a tool that DNR has, and we also did this in concert with MDE, but a tool that we have to identify underutilized green spaces in the state. There's a lot of them. This year, we just launched a new program called the Green Space Equity Program. We have a big land acquisition program called Program Open Space, but the Green Space Equity Program was really designed for EJ communities to identify smaller plots of land for them to have publicly available green spaces, mostly in urban areas, but also rural. That application is open right now. It closes December 1st. It's a really exciting program, but that's one of the ways in which we've been able to really learn from the federal government, but also partners at MTE to really take those screening tools and apply them to our programs to do good stuff. A couple other big initiatives that we have. We recently were awarded a big climate pollution reduction grant. So the few ways in which we've been taking advantage and utilizing Justice40 is through acquiring, these grants through the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law to have those funds and then create a re-grant system to our grantees. So the grant for Maryland is $50 million. DNR is getting $43 million to do a lot of implementation around climate resiliency, mitigation, adaptation. This is going to create 27,000 new green jobs in the state. We're going to do a lot of tree plantings, and a lot of that is in concert too with Department of Transportation, MDE, and other state partners. So we're excited to do that work. It's also going to have a huge community outreach component that I'm going to manage. We're going to stand up a community liaison program. So I'm going to be hiring people who are in the community on the Eastern Shore. That's something that is a need. I know there's another question around outreach and partnerships, but that's a way that we want to make sure that people are involved in those decision making and making sure that we're really putting those resources where they need to go and where they matter. Another program that we have through Justice40 is our Community Forestry Catalyst Fund. So we anticipate this to be a 4-year program. We just awarded $1.2 million to 6 communities across the state to implement trees in urban spaces. And this is all in support of Justice40. 4 of those communities community organizations are in the Baltimore area. I wish I could talk to you about all of the really great programs, but a few that I'll call out. Audubon Mid-Atlantic has a program to do a transferable community-based forest stewardship model, which is really cool. Green Space Equity, Baltimore Green Space, and Backyard Base Camp, they have a grant as well to do some community forest patchwork and do more engagement programs in concert with community and plant trees. That's really exciting. The city of Baltimore, their city parks and rec, they're going to be getting some money to do more capacity building for their forestry programs. So I'm excited to be able to support some of our city and municipal partners in that as well. So there's a lot, that we're doing, and also working in partnership with the Bay Trust and other partners to also provide technical assistance to people. We're not perfect at this, and the one, big challenge I think that we have as a state agency is that, although we are granting grants to community-based organizations, there's oftentimes, barriers when it comes to reimbursing people for that money. And also a lot of our grants are designed for cities and local governments and large municipalities to take on. And so we have to really rely on them to do community engagement work, which some are great at and some are not. So I think it's really important as I continue, in this role to make sure that as we're, putting together our grant applications and, we're asking questions to build in equity into all of those lenses. So, we have some challenges, but I'm always here to discuss ideas that you might have to help to continue, building organizations' technical capacity. There's a lot that I could continue to talk about, but those are just a few grant programs, and actually I'm forgetting one that I do want to mention, because in one of our programs we are exceeding our Justice40 goals. So we have a Grants Gateways program. A lot of this money, this is a premier program that we have at DNR. We have, I think in fiscal year 25, we had $21 million that went out to organizations to do a lot of stream restoration work. We have a program around equitable access to a waterway improvement fund to repair boat ramps and things like that. A lot of this work also goes to climate resiliency and mitigation. So a lot of projects that are implemented on the ground. But that program, we've invested over the Justice40 goal. In our 3rd year of one of the rounds of funding, we've invested more than 90% of our investments through that program has gone to overburdened and underserved communities. So the money that that we have and this opportunity that we have with Justice40 is great. It's limited funding, and we need to get more of it out of the door. So those are just a few things we have. So thank you.
All right, so I'm actually not going to talk about grant programs. I'm going to talk about accountability tools, which every good organizer loves. So, and specifically, I mentioned our consolidated transportation program. That's our big investment program, and it's a portfolio of projects. And what that portfolio is made up of is super important. So project selection, in other words, and project prioritization is super important, and that's something we're taking a look at now, is changing the way that projects are selected and prioritized for inclusion in our consolidated transportation program. So hold us accountable for improving the way that's done. And in fact, we have a plan called the Attainment Report, which is put out regularly, which provides performance metrics for MDOT to follow. One of the drawbacks of it is it's been around probably 15 years, and I've served on, when I was an advocate, I served on the advisory committee for it a few times, and the number of metrics has grown and grown and grown. So, right, and if you measure everything, you're not really measuring anything. So we're trying to trim those. But having said that, the good news is in last year's attainment report, we added a new metric. We want to increase the number of Marylanders who have access to transit within a half mile of their home. Right, so that's going to be something we're going to want to improve on as we move forward and get really serious about transit. And then second, we want to know what percentage of the consolidated transportation program investments are going to overburdened and underserved communities. So, and we have some headroom for improvement there. The last number I have for you is in fiscal year 23, we were at 31.4%. So we want to increase that number. It's a new metric for us, which I'm excited about, and I hope you will hold us accountable for increasing the number of projects in the portfolio that go to overburdened and underserved communities in order to improve our performance. The other thing that we're working to improve on is actual project development and delivery. So the way transportation works, and this is required by federal law, but it's also very intuitive, we have a 20-plus year long-range transportation plan. This is the Maryland Transportation Plan. Visionary, high level, kind of cool, but also not really where the rubber hits the road. You get closer to where the rubber hits the road with the Consolidated Transportation Program. It's a 6-year investment program. It's yay thick, and it tells you what actually Maryland is investing in. It's super important. Most important is what happens in terms of developing and delivering those projects. And we want to make sure that through our 7 state highway administration offices across the state, and through our other agencies, that we're being as responsive as possible to local communities and to citizens of those communities as we work to implement these projects. So for example, the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, 23 most dangerous corridors for bicyclists and pedestrians. We're going to get through that list and retrofit those corridors one at a time. Those are going to be big projects, and we're going to want to have a lot of public involvement and local official involvement in terms of what those look like. And I hope that you all will get involved. You probably have at least one of these not too far from where you live. I know I do. I live in College Park, actually not that far from here. So looking forward to a lot of improvements thanks to that, and to a lot of involvement to help to make that happen. Thanks.
All right, so lots of examples of tools and resources and grant applications that everybody can be working on. What questions do you have? If you have a general question that everybody can answer, great. If you have a specific question for an agency, let me know. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Colville, I'm the Climate Change Officer for Montgomery County. And just first thank you all for your partnership and working on behalf of our communities. One thing that, in terms of making sure that we are maximizing grant opportunities, not just for our own government, but also for our nonprofit partners, I've identified kind of the listservs, like, you know, service providers that we give grants to, or a faith-based listserv, where I could get out grant opportunities to our local networks of service providers who are not, you know, environmental grants aren't even on their radar because they're a food pantry, or they're a health service provider, or they're doing social services, but they have a fleet and they have a building, and a lot of these grants apply, or they have, you know, land around them, and a lot of these grants apply to them. But I'm really struggling with the most efficient way to sort of get those opportunities and get them out and encourage folks to apply to them. So any thoughts that you have about sort of collective resource and sort of flows of information so that we are getting the money to the folks doing the work?
And I'm just going to repeat the questions. We're online now, right? Okay, so just for the folks online, I am going to repeat the question, and it's a great question about making sure that information about these types of grant programs, so let's, environmental grants that might not be on the radar of some community-based organizations, or giving the example of food pantry, but organizations who have a fleet or who have land, so would be eligible for these federal grants or state dollars to electrify your fleet or other types of opportunities, and that would probably be, serving overburdened, underserved communities in the state, and so would, sort of count towards Justice40 goals. So there's various listservs, but what are some good ideas for efficient and effective ways to get that information out there to some people who might not otherwise have this opportunity on their radar at all? Hope I captured that, Sarah. Okay. That also gave you more time to think of your answers.
One thing I'll mention is that Dr. Wilson and National Wildlife Federation have a TIC-TAC grant, Thriving Communities, Environmental Justice Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers. I used to be a project partner on the project, but I'm in this role, so I'm not anymore. But their whole thing is basically building a financial literacy program to reach environmental justice communities. So being able to provide trainings to train up people to say, hey, this is exactly how you can apply for a grant, get grant funding, and so on. So that's just getting started, and a lot of those partners are here. And so they're working with the Maryland Environmental Finance Center to come up with a database of grants to get those opportunities out to the communities that they're training up. So that's a regional effort, but there is a Maryland focus. But I also think that all of us in the room can be doing a better job at sharing those grant opportunities, especially as we're talking to the same people that we're all trying to meet. So it'd be great to just connect with you afterwards. But I think it's just an ongoing challenge around internal communication that I think we should probably come up with a better system. But the TIC-TAC is just one resource for you.
All right, so to that end, I would say use the tools that we use every day and get our information from. How do you like your information? I dabble with TikTok, right? I'm still a little bit old school, so I still have a Facebook page. I still have Instagram. There's, other tools that are coming out. Utilize social media. You can use analytics. I was actually just looking at some of our Google Analytics yesterday as figuring out what demographic is our information getting to. But understanding that the tools that you use every day are also the tools that you can use to advertise to the groups that we're trying to reach, for them to understand what's going. And, when I did my work as a nonprofit, we did flyers. I went to churches and pinned on the board. I went, to the local coffee shop and had call me. I got some exciting programs that you could, we did that work. And when you put that effort in, you do see a response. And I think that's kind of short term, right? It's use it, tapping into those resources. But, and I think during lunch, we kind of hit on that with the panel, is you have to build authentic relationships and be in communities. And those things take time. So if you haven't started building those trusted relationships, you need to start. And that is one of the reasons why being here, I do the meet and greets with communities. I have my staff, we go to the block parties. We're not only there when there's an environmental crisis, right? We have to be there then, but I want to be there when we're celebrating the woman that turned 100 years old. I want my staff to be there, when we're celebrating, the basketball victory or the football victory. We have to be in the communities, and we have to be building authentic relationships. And I know it's hard because we have money with a time crunch on it, and then we have a mandate. But understanding that building relationships takes time, and you have to start building those for people to feel comfortable, and for you to even see the synergy of what you have available to them that could also help, right? A lot of times, I'll come in a room and my mandate may be, to do this thing to get this EV charging station or something else. But the community's mandate might be, they're scared that every time their children go across the street at the rec center, they're able to, they're getting hit. But maybe now I know that that's something that you're concerned about. I can get an EV charging station and I can get speed bumps. Now, my original plan wouldn't have ever called for you to have speed bumps on your site, right? But I talk to you, I'm having this interaction, so I know I can add this other thing and also make it very impactful for the community that I'm engaging with. And they'll keep coming back and they'll start asking, and they'll be looking for opportunities as I avail them to them. So, thank you.
It's hard to compete with those. Those are great. A couple things. You know, Maryland Energy Administration, we're a small agency. You know, we're about 60 people. So we are really leaning and working and establishing those partnerships to work with community-based organizations, place-based organizations to get the word out, identifying trusted intermediaries, those who can help bring people to us, because we don't want to be where they look at our work and say, it's another government agency. No, we want to be part of the communities. And the other is building awareness of who we are and what our mission is and how it relates to people's lives. We sponsored the First Thursdays concerts in Baltimore. Big venues, lots of people. I started to say, oh, it's the Maryland Energy Administration. It kept bringing us all these really good questions. And having those conversations one-on-one, and they're telling their friends, and their friends are telling their friends. So really an opportunity to meet people where they are. And then sort of on the other side of the work is letting the projects we have funded sort of speak to the outcomes and others who may be looking at things like them. We funded out in Western Maryland, we funded a education center where they installed solar, a number of other clean energy technologies, and they bring students from Frostburg University, and they bring students from the local schools who get to experience this. They use it as an educational resource. It's the only one of its kind in that area to be able to give people that sort of direct experience with these technologies. And so, you know, when you sort of combine all this, it's like, how do we ensure that we get the word out to people? So another example is we've got radio ads running right now where we talk about, hey, we've got clean energy project we funded in a library or recreation center. Go see it, go experience it, go talk to others in your community, go talk to your local government partners to be able to say, okay, how can we do more of this? So we're still very much growing and learning in this regard. I think we will always be growing and learning in regard of how to reach and how to get the word about our work. But if there are any ideas in this, anyone in this audience or anyone listening remotely, please reach out, send us your ideas, because we want to get all of the options out there to get the word out so that we can help get resources where we can help communities and help our goals.
I just want to offer quickly, since Just Communities does not yet have programming, one of the things my director and I have been thinking about is how do we amplify all of the opportunities that exist across the state. But one of the things that we know, it's often not good enough to know about the information, to somebody's point about how onerous some of these applications are. They're often also not written in a way that people can see that connection to their community, to their issue. I am a certified community health worker. You know, there's also another way of thinking about people as intersectional professionals, that you have lived and professional experience. I think that there is a wonderful exercise for those of us who find ourselves in these wonderful positions to actually, you know, ground truth the way things are written and find out if that is some of the reason people don't see themselves on the page. Or to the point of whomever brought it forward, if the programs, Anika, if the programs are such that you know there's flexibility internally, but it's not yet written on that page, how do we interpolate, as my mom would say, make meaning of the things so that we can help people to see you and your entire community could actually access these resources, even if you're small, maybe there's a need for fiscal sponsorship. I put this forward because we made our website, so there is Just Communities email, and there's a WUFU form. So we are very much hoping that people send us inquiries, also if there are opportunities. It would be wonderful. Some of what Crystal and I like to do, she's my director, is thinking about how do we make this intelligible to people that we know, and then making sure also to send things out with enough time to actually to actually complete. I know that's one of the things community often says, right? Because in addition to trust building, you also want people to feel confident and like they want to try again, and or inform how we are targeting resources as state government. Perhaps more technical assistance is needed, and I plug that because I was a technical assistance capacity builder for the past 7.5 years at a nonprofit that worked on racial economic equity, racial wealth equity, and helped organizations increase operating budgets and also program budgets. But the reasons people don't apply or aren't successful actually are very surprising, right? So the ask is, if anybody does want to look up Just Communities and send any kinds of opportunities or things that you know your community members need, I think that's also an interesting way for us to think about how do we target funding, especially if we're thinking about communities that have been excluded. They have a lot of interesting innovations and solutions that could be funded more quickly, in my opinion. And I think that we are definitely interested in trying to establish some of those precedent and pilots. So being able to translate, though, I think some of this information into ways that it's meaningful for community and has their data and also their research is very, very helpful as well.
Yeah, I'll just be very brief because I think it was, as Eric was saying, we can all probably do a better job of this. We do, however, we are large enough to have someone who's dedicated to working with local jurisdictions and to working with partners to apply for as much federal money as possible, especially from the infrastructure law. And we frequently have open houses at our 7 state highway administration district offices across the state where we invite citizens to come, local officials to come, other local partners to come and learn about grant opportunities. We have a series of presentations about how to apply for grants. We write letters of support routinely for as many grant proposals as we can get them out for, because we're trying to make as much of this rain on Maryland as possible, because in case you aren't aware, the infrastructure law expires at the end of 2026 and the Inflation Reduction Act ends at the end of this decade. So the 2020s are kind of a key period for bringing in as much of this money as possible into Maryland. And the last thing I'll say is there is a federal discretionary grants mailing list that we offer, and this is the person I was talking about. This is one of the things he does, is he provides this wonderful service where he sends out notes basically about upcoming grant opportunities and notices of funding opportunities. So if you just Google Federal Discretionary Grants Mailing List, Maryland Department of Transportation, you can go ahead and add your name to it and you'll receive his updates. And he keeps a frequently updated webpage as well about applications that are in from the state of Maryland that we're aware of, as well as ones that we've received, right, in order to be able to track that.
Thanks. To just add another thing to answer the question, I think, I didn't know you're a community health worker. That's cool. So my background is public health as well, and I'm in this climate policy space because I believe just climate policy builds health equity, right? And so when we think about places like community health resource fairs, and having a table at a community health resource fair or a health clinic, COVID booster clinic, right? Like my whole family's going to get our flu and COVID shots this weekend at the pediatrician is doing their clinic. Like, why not have find out about community-based health resources like that and have, because people are not going with, environmental grants in mind, but turns out, oh, you're eligible for this weatherization. You're eligible for the Empower, take advantage of the Empower program. And if you're low income in the state of Maryland, it's free through DHCD. And everybody pays into that program. So think about the places where we don't normally show up, but people show up and go there. And it's also where people are really, if they're already thinking about their health, it's a way to reach people on climate too, because climate change is impacting our health every single day. And it's impacting those same overburdened and underserved communities more than everybody else. And so when we think about disproportionate impacts of climate change and the resources available to help address that and build resiliency, Community Health Resource Fair, might be something that environmental entities wouldn't have thought about, but is an interesting place to go and have a table and have grant applications available. So are there any, we don't have time to answer them, but please, I want to hear questions, and then maybe we can go home with those. So yeah, Dorothy, go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the most efficient thing that comes to my mind is having something like a one-stop shop,
Mm-hmm.
searchable database,
Mm-hmm.
where I can go in, enter in my problem or whatever it is that is climate change, and then have a list of the different needs and resources. Now, this might take a lot of money, I don't know, but I'm just going to tell you the most efficient way to do it. So one-stop shop database, I can go in, search, and then have everything be populated. Everyone has this, Big City has this, Yale has this. And then I can say, okay, it's what it's not, it's organizing to
Mm-hmm.
then I can go into calculations.
Mm-hmm. 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 I'm getting the time's up sign, but I just want to repeat the comment for the folks online, and it was about an efficient way to do this work is to have this one-stop shop. So to think about, is there a coordinating entity among state agencies so that people searching don't have to go to each and every agency, but can identify which grants you'd be eligible for and then go after the technical assistance for each. But to have that one-stop shop, feels like there might be Tic-Tac support for something like that. I just saying. So yeah, that one-stop shop. Any other unanswered questions? Don't leave anything behind. Do you have questions? We won't have to answer them, but please ask them. Mm. Mm. Yep. 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 Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the great, just going to repeat it quickly for the folks online, and as a great point about sustainability of funding. You know, we heard the roaring 20s of the climate investments, right, are happening right now. What happens when that money, what happens when those laws, when the money dries up? Also, your positions are all new, created under the current administration. Well, that administration is also, you know, time-bound, right? So are we thinking about sustainability of these positions, this work, the community engagement? Because that's the thing, these things, you know, progress moves at the pace of trust, right? And you cannot, you build the trust, and then the money's gone, so like, peace out? Like, or you finally build the trust, and there's an election. So we need to, you know, I think there's a session about funding coming up, and that, so talking to funders about this, talking to government entities about this, talking, you know, that taking that time to build the trust is the first step, and then how do we, like, how is there sustained and engaged support in perpetuity? And I said, I think, unfortunately, that's our time. It's a great question to end on, though, and something to really chew on and think about over the next few days, and please be in touch with us about it. So thanks so much for your engagement today. I really enjoyed the conversation. Let's thank our panelists and the conference organizers, and we'll see you around the conference. Thank you so much.